let's begin. So, yes, thanks everyone. Thank you for joining me today. In this talk, I want to share my experience with side projects, including how I got started and the resources I used, as well as some tips and other things that I've learned along the way. Um, Also, if you have any questions, comments, or complaints, please post them in the chat and I'll get to them at the very end. So, first, I think that I should start with a little bit about myself. So, my name is Maria Jose Solano. My family is Colombian, but I've lived in a lot of Latin American countries. I completed my undergrad in McGill University, where I studied mathematics and computer science. I'm now currently living in Vancouver. I'm working as a software engineer at Microsoft. I should say that I was not one of those prodigy children that began coding when they were 5. In fact, when I started my undergrad, I thought that I was going to major in physics. But then after writing that first Hello World program, I just fell in love with coding and never looked back. At the beginning of this year, as I mentioned, I started working with Microsoft. I work with DevDev, also known as the developer division, which is responsible for creating and maintaining developer tools like VS Code, Visual Studio, and a bunch of others. I work with TypeScript and JavaScript tooling for Visual Studio. As you can see from the picture, I take rubber duck debugging seriously. And if you don't know what that is, I encourage you to look it up because it's a very interesting idea. And so, okay, now let's move to what this talk is about. So first, I want to share my definition of a side project. A side project is something that you're willing to do for free during your spare time, and which will potentially won't result on anything beyond a bunch of code in a GitHub repo. Now, related a couple of main points. Side projects should be enjoyable, and if you ask yourself, oh, how do I remain motivated to work on my side project? Then you haven't found the right side project, because you will potentially won't receive any money for it. No one will force you to work on it. So you really want to work on it. Another important characteristic is that although side projects might become startups, most of the time they will die as cute repos on GitHub. That sometimes you might bring up on a conversation and brag about. And that's okay. The best part of a side project should be working on it, not what it yields. And so, how I got started. In the third summer of my undergrad, I really wanted to get an internship.
Sorry, this screen is really small. We can't, could you make it bigger?
Oh, sorry. So I think that I haven't, let me see. So you guys also the display that I have of, I'll stop playing. Let's see if I can make this right. So maybe that helps?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. Oh, wow. I just realized that I guess that you guys were seeing the same display that I had of seeing 2 slides at the same time, like the presenters display.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not great. Thank you for letting me know. But okay. So maybe I'll just go back to a couple of slides for you guys to see the full picture. But yes, now let's go back to the slide. So how I got started. So in the middle of a pandemic, I was in the third summer of my undergrad. I really wanted to get an internship. And after 2 years of doing research and realizing that I wasn't really that passionate about it, I was starting to be bored of academia. And so I sent my CV to hundreds of companies, although I was only interested in the fancy companies we all know about. and just waited. Then that was at the end of 2019, and then the pandemic started. The companies that didn't ghost me, they just rejected me. And so from May to August of 2020, I was quarantined in my Montreal studio with nothing to do. And so I decided to learn. I had been interested in web dev for a really long time, but a computer science university program teaches you about sorting algorithms, no, not how to center a div. And so I researched on Reddit what were the best free or very cheap online resources and found Udemy. Um, those 4 months of me learning at my own pace were amazing. I didn't earn a single cent, but I was just coding for the fun of it. I learned so much about real world software development that I had never even thought about. Um, I didn't only focus on the side projects themselves, I made sure to use the best and most modern tools. Um, I forced myself to get over my Git trauma, and so I created feature branches, wrote atomic commits, learned what a Git rebase was. Um, Before then, I would be the kind of person that upon the first Git merge conflict, I would just delete the entire repo and clone it again. Um, this experience also allowed me to remember why I loved computer science. Um, and the thing is that I just love the creative nature of it. How a program doesn't just feel like a bunch of computer instructions, but something that's alive and dynamic. The small and silly projects that I worked on became a great addition to my CV. And now I could comfortably talk about web dev and tech stacks during my interviews, allowing me to land my Microsoft internship the year after that. And so I now want to share how I made this an enriching experience. Number one, follow the exercises. Don't just watch the videos. If the instructor tells you to pause the video and try a problem yourself, actually do it. It might sound silly, but like these people are creating this content and they're structuring that way for a reason. Number two, use your own code style. If the instructor is using JavaScript but you like types, then use TypeScript. If the course uses CSS but for styling you prefer JSS, then go ahead. This helps you actively practice instead of mindlessly copying the code that you're seeing on the video. Number three, take a moment to tune your coding tools, install the right extensions in VS Code or your editing tool, create snippets for the things that you have to write over and over again, among many other things that you can do. This is often an underrated part of coding since it doesn't involve a lot of coding itself. But researching and tuning these kind of hacks really make a difference and really make you feel that you are like a hacker. And finally, understand the code. If you create a new React project using Create React App, then take a minute to look at what the CLI creates and understand what each file is for. Read the docs, or a blog post, or a Stack Overflow comment until you understand what each function, file, API that you're using is and how it does what it does. Tweak the code, play around with it, and consider alternatives, but truly like own the code that you're writing. Okay, but so far I've just been like talking about watching videos, and what if you don't want to do that? That's okay. This is just what I did, but you can skip that part and go ahead and start by asking yourself, is there an app or website or IDE extension or whatever that you like, but that you could do better? If the answer is yes, then go ahead and do it. Either by creating a mock application or contributing to the original project directly, if it's open source, of course. A side project can also just be a learning activity. experimenting with a new programming language. For example, you can create the coolest Hello World program, or learn the language and then create a series of interactive tutorials on a blog or on a repo or on social media, and then just become a coding YouTuber, or on TikTok, I guess. Um, if you're still in university and doing homework, a good side project can also just be revamping an assignment that you enjoyed doing. Or if you are working on something at work and it's open source and you really liked it, then I mean, there's nothing preventing you from just extending that. Um, and something very important is that you don't need to know exactly what you want to do from the very beginning. You can start simple and say, I want to create an Android app. By the time you're done setting up Android Studio and have an initial template, you will probably know at that point what the app should be about. If you don't want to work on a standalone thing by yourself, then try open source. There are so many cool projects out there with thousands of issues ready for contributors to just grab and fix them. So you can try that. Open source is great for learning how to work in large and unknown code bases, and they're great when you're just curious about something, but don't even know where to get started. On the slide, I show a PR I made to VS Code ESLint. For a very long time, I've been wanting to create an extension for VS Code, but I don't even know what the extension would be about. And so I just looked up one of my favorite extensions, saw that there was an issue asking for a new feature, and so I went ahead and implemented it. And it allowed me to get more familiar with the extensibility API and just know how I would go around getting started in creating my future new VS Code extension. And last but definitely not the least, as I said before, don't force yourself to work on this if you don't feel like it. Side projects are about the development process and not the end result. So take your time and enjoy the ride. And so now I want to mention a couple of my own side projects. And so I'll go ahead. And I'm pretty sure that I'm sharing my window. So I think, yes, you should be seeing now. But okay, Ramble is my web dev baby. I built it from scratch 3 times. And remember the constant iteration process that I mentioned before. I've always used React for it, but for the first time, I used a regular REST server, and the website looked awful on mobile. And so the second time, I focused on the website looking good on any device, and so I made it very dynamic. Then the third time, I got even fancier and used GraphQL and transformed the server into Apollo, and then all of the website is written with TypeScript. And during those 3 times, it was always the same website, but I was growing as an engineer. I was applying directly what I learned into this website, and by refactoring it, I was able to apply these things into this huge project. This website has just grown with me. It allowed me to explore Material UI. It allowed me to explore payment integration with Next.js and with Stripe. There's also like so much state, for example. There are fancy CSS animations. There's like this huge form that involves many steps and keeping state among many steps, although this is a single page application. And I think that I did this in the process of 3 different summers, so it definitely took a while, but it's something that I feel proud of because it's something that I've coded every single line of code of it just for fun. No one really forced me to do it, but I was able to learn about the tools that this was my first experience writing in TypeScript, and now I'm working on the TypeScript team. So I guess that it was worth it. So going back to the slides, another project that I have is a game dev one. It's one of the small video games that I created, Raton, which is mouse in Spanish. And in this game, in particular, I focused on creating all of the assets myself. So that explains the very basic pixel art. I'll show you a very brief demo. Unfortunately, if I try to open Unity, I'm scared that the computer might crash since Unity is a very heavy program. But here on Twitch, I have a very small embedded demo. So the cat is chasing me and the mouse is supposed to catch all of the cheese. And then you can see that the game ends, it just freezes, nothing else happens. And again, this reinforces the idea that you don't need to wait for a final product in order to release it. This is just my MVP, my minimally viable product before I started sharing it. And in the future, I plan on adding AI or adding extra levels. But for now, I think that it looks good enough. I have it there. I'm working on other things, but once I feel like returning to game dev again, I'll make sure to revisit this project. And as a fun fact, all of the coding that I do today for work is using C#. Before my current job, the only other experience that I had with C# was via game dev. So it's just something that I wanted to share. So to the slides. And so side projects are also things that you should brag about. Once you're done with them, share them on GitHub and include a link to your CV. When you have something that looks decent enough for sharing, then you can also create a post on LinkedIn and mention it. I know that it might be cringy, but recruiters are constantly hunting for this kind of stuff. So make sure to mention these kind of things in your CV and on LinkedIn. And side projects are the basis of a portfolio. So if you haven't already, create one. And I want to show you mine. And so a portfolio, it's supposed to just be a very simple website where you can include your contact information, and then you can also list the projects that you have with summaries and links to them or to brief demos. And these really help you give a very professional look. And they're very good ways of just having everything that you want to share and show available online. And they also help recruiters find you because when they look up your name on a browser, they will reach your portfolio. And so now I want to mention some of my favorite resources. And no, I'm not sponsored by any of these people. This is just a list of my favorite Udemy courses. I like the website because they have sales basically every other day. And so with less than $10, you can get really good quality content. There are fancier bootcamps or certificates out there, but from my own experience, I don't think these are worth it if you already have a computer science background. These kind of bootcamps, they focus way too much on the foundations without going into depth on the main concepts. And so I would encourage you to just look up the documentation, look up the very specific resources that you're interested in, and skip the bootcamp. And so my first resource that I recommend here, it's a React course. I use React in all of my full stack projects, but in general, you can any content from this guy, Max, I cannot pronounce that last name. But any content from this guy is great. He's German and he has most of his stuff in Udemy. There's also this other course, not from Max, but it was the first Udemy course that I took, and it covered like the full picture of full stack, and I think that it does it pretty well. For game dev, there's a lot of courses from the gamedev.tv team, and I find them to be really, really good. And finally, I'm someone that I read instructions and MDN. It's great. Anything related to JavaScript or TypeScript or web dev, each page has great examples and it's great. And that's all for now. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Codementor for letting me give this talk. And yes, now I'm going to stop sharing my screen and move to the Q&A. So I'm just going to scroll on the chat to see if, oh guys, I'm seeing that you had been mentioning the small screen from the very beginning, but I was not reading the chat at that point and lost it. So someone asked, is my VS Code not up to date? From Matt. I wonder what that comment was about. From, I think rebuilding the same project in different technologies is really good for learning. Yes, and that's, I think that refactoring, it's a very underrated part of software development, but it's still so very important and so satisfying when you're able to just look at the code and feel proud of it. I think that that's something that it's really satisfying. And yeah, and yes, from Chrissy, I'll be sharing these slides. Oh, I see. I think that this UI doesn't let me share content, but for sure I'll be sharing the slides when the recording gets posted, and which I think will happen in a week from now. So the slides will be there for sure with all of the links that I included. Let's see, Francisco. How did my day look when I was watching the Udemy videos? 8 hours of Udemy videos and coding? Yes. And I know that that doesn't sound like the most interesting day, but again, I was in the middle of a pandemic. I was not seeing friends, I was not seeing family, and yes, it was mostly 8 hours of Udemy videos and coding. I want to say that I was just not like binge watching all of these courses and like coding at the same time. Like I was watching the video, and then if the instructor did something that I disagreed with, like, oh, this method feels like so wrong, then I would take my time and like try to code it myself, and then tweak it and write it the way I wanted it to be. And that really helped. And I think that's something that every time that I encountered a problem, for example, I remember when I first started coding with GraphQL, I encountered a lot of problems with the VS Code extension for GraphQL. And so I created a bunch of issues on the repo for the extension, and I fixed a couple of those. And that resulted in a bunch of like tangents that went on for weeks of me just trying to make GraphQL in VS Code work. But I learned so much from it. And as I say, like those are parts of very important parts of side projects. And so I think like there's something to learn from any of those experiences. From Prince, is it a must for a software developer to master data structures and algorithms? I mean, I don't think so. I think that in terms of data structures and algorithms, as long as you know enough to solve a basic political question, you should be good. So yeah. I was wondering how long do you give your time for my side projects? So I mostly work on my side projects during weekends. I try not to work on my side projects during my work hours. But I do work on my side projects like after long days of work. And they're really refreshing in the sense that, like, sometimes with the work that I do, I'm working on Visual Studio, which is a very, it's a huge product. But then there's so much legacy code. There's so much code that I cannot touch because it's not controlled by my team. Everything is super slow, and if I make a change, it needs to get reviewed, it needs to go through a pipeline, it will get released in months from now. And so, and this is just a result from working in a very large company. And the nice thing about a side projects is the fact that you will be the CFO, the CEO, and the CTO. You don't need to wait on a pipeline. You don't need to wait for a code review. You can just like do what you want. You're your own boss. And so I find that very refreshing after a long day of work, that I'm just waiting for the pipeline to pass for a reason that I have no control over. And then I get to work on my side project that's just completely controlled by me. um, I find that refreshing and makes me kind of get excited about coding. Any advice when applying to big tech like Microsoft? Um, Side projects. Um, I want to say that I sent my CV to Microsoft every year of my undergrad, and only after that summer of me working on side projects did I get a response, and I was not immediately ghosted afterwards. And I didn't only get responses from Microsoft, I got responses from other companies that rhyme with poodle. So I think that it helped. Um, from Joe, my biggest issue with side projects is that for some reason I have it in my head that they don't count since I don't get paid for it. Yes, and yes, or maybe they don't count because like they will just like be hidden on GitHub. But I think that like if money would be a good motivation, you can also do kind of what I did of just getting together with friends and trying to make that side project become a startup. I mean, there's, and I know that it might sound like a wild dream to say like I'm just going to go and create a startup, but that's how startups get created in the first place. So from Diego, was it too hard to land my job at Microsoft? No. Something that I do want to mention, and the nice thing about having side projects on your CV is that if you're scared of coding interviews, um, when you have side projects to talk about, then and it's on your CV, then the interviewer will potentially ask you about them during your interview. And if you talk about them for a very long time, they will be less time to lead code. And so if you have side projects, that means less time on the coding interview for lead code. So that's a plus. Is there a recommended project to start with? Um, Not really. I think that it just like it depends on if you want your side project to be based on things that you already know about. And so for example, like um if your side project it's like I'm going to create a new website, but you don't even know like JavaScript, HTML, or CSS, then maybe you should start little and say like I'm going to learn JavaScript, and then you can move to like that project of I want to create a website. um so yes, like try to don't be too ambitious with what the initial side project should be, because otherwise it might be hard to obtain and then you will just be unmotivated. So be realistic, but having that full picture of what you want to the end result to be, that also helps. From Carlos, if I were to do a new side project with more people, where would I go to find them? That's a good question. I think that like either at work, or I've also had really good interactions when contributing to open source. And so maybe I would like reach out to these people on GitHub and create an issue on their repos and be like, hey, I'm working on this extension and this project seems similar. If you're interested, and here's my email. But yes, I think that finding the people to work on a side project, it can either be, I mean, anyone. Um, Maybe not your best friend, because yes, like if you try to make a startup with your best friend, you're probably going to have a lot of fights and discussions, and then you might lose the friendship. But who knows? Um, how often were my side projects mentioned in tech interviews? Every time. Um, yes, every time. And I think that they're really they add a lot because they show that you can code and that you can do stuff without being for without being forced to do it. Like I remember when I was in university, I was a teaching assistant, I was a TA, and a lot of people they couldn't code anything beyond the university assignments, and so they just didn't have the motivation to do it. They were like, what's the point of writing a program if I'm not getting a grade for it, or I'm not like getting paid for it? um so I think that having a side project shows like, hey, I like to code in general, um which is something that tech companies want. um and yes, Carlos, you found your side project partner. What was my interview process like? I applied. Months later, I heard back. Then I got a phone screener. Then I got two interviews. Then I was an intern. Then I got a return offer, and now I'm here. Um, you can think of side projects as an investment, yes. A side project, you can also have a meta side project, like me, of talking about side projects, and that can become your side project. Um, As a new developer, it is difficult to bring projects to fruition due to roadblocks. For example, unable to deploy via Heroku. Yes, I heard that recently they removed their free tier. For simple questions that cannot be answered. Um, that's great, Gigi, and you bring out a great point. So for Heroku, I use Verso. It's a great alternative. It's free, which is always great. Um, and about simple questions that cannot be answered. That's a great point, because like something that happens in large companies and with internal code, like the code that I deal with at Microsoft, it's that there's a lot of code that doesn't have a public documentation, that uses only internal only APIs. And basically the only person that understands the code is the person who wrote it and that left the company 20 years ago. And so now I'm reading this code that I have no idea what it does. What do I do? Who do I ask? And it's being blocked like that. It's definitely very frustrating. The good thing about web dev is the fact that it's so popular, and it is based on open source, that pretty much anything that you wonder and that any question that you might have, there will potentially be a Stack Overflow issue there. If it's related to a specific tool, look up their issues on GitHub, because usually if it's like a very like obvious bug, there's potentially already an issue there, and there will potentially be someone very nice including a solution on the GitHub issue, and you can try that. If that doesn't work, then yeah, like if when you're just like stuck, then try to find a workaround. And I know that it sounds obvious, but they're like these very large companies. Sometimes you will have a side project, and then you will say, hey, you changed your API, and now this function that I was using doesn't exist anymore, and now my side project is broken. But then the very large company tells you like, well, we removed it, and you're the only person that has complained about it, so we won't fix it. And so you don't want your side project to just die because this very large company didn't consider your problem to be high priority enough. So finding a workaround, it's a very important part of software development, like being able to write adaptive code. That, like, of course it will have dependencies, but it shouldn't be easily broken by changes in those. And software development, it's changing every single day, with breaking changes happening every single day. And so, yes, this is very important for sure. And there is, yes, side projects, I can tell you that 90% of my side projects, they're just very cute repos on GitHub that I've earned no money from. They look like a 90-year-old, not 90-year-old, but like a 5-year-old girl that loves pink created those. But I was mentioning the tech stacks that I used when I was talking about them on my interviews. I guess that the people interviewing me, they realized that I actually knew what React and Mongoose and Express were. And so, yes, I think that being real about what you learned and being real that you actually coded these things, that's the important part. If you're Evan, I hope I pronounced that right. If you're interested in backend web dev, how much of a front end should I be familiar with? The amount of front end that you should be familiar with, it's proportional to how pretty you want your website to be. So if you don't care about the front end, and you just want to have like the most basic website in order to have UI for the backend, then just like create a simple HTML site and don't focus on the CSS. That being said, like, I want to say that front end, it's under said to be like the boring part, but like with frameworks like Next.js, the front end and the back end get so connected, that the front end gets exciting. And like, forget about those like memes about how to center a div. Like CSS, it's getting to be much more exciting, and styling, it can be fun. And seeing something that looks pretty on a website can be satisfying sometimes. Okay, Patrick, it's also answering to Carlos' question. From Ray, I'm studying Java. Oh, Java was my first programming language. And I love playing with code and building various little programs. I'm not on the level of doing side projects yet. But I came to get a heads up, so where I am. Nice. And see, there's no question in that comment, but something that I do want to say regarding that is that, I mean, here's a side project for you, Ray. You can create a website where you share all of these like tiny little programs, and then when you share them, you mention like the topics that they like, the data structures that they use. So for example, like, I don't know, you can say like, oh, this program, it sorts a list using this algorithm, and you can make them like a learning resource, because that's something that I find it that it's often so hard to find a good example. Like, you will find the function, you will find like the documentation for it, but you're like, okay, but how do I actually use it? So I think that having like these kind of small applications, it could really help. And okay, it seems that there are no more questions for now. But yes, I'll be sharing my slides with the recording. My contact information will also be there. So if there's anything that I can help with, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm not a Microsoft recruiter, so I cannot help you like getting to Microsoft. I really wish I could, but I cannot. But yes. So I'll let you go, and thanks everyone for coming. I hope that you found it useful, and sorry for the problem with the slides at the very beginning. Have a good one.